Thank you, Rosemary. Can you hear me? Okay. What a great room. I can talk to you. I can turn around, talk over here, talk to you. I'm really looking forward to next Monday because I will have to watch that video and hear me say, only one more time. In hindsight, I wish I had done another take, but there's really nothing I can do about it now. It's been a lot of fun this summer. I have seen that, I think now 5 or 6 times. And the video that you'll see at the luncheon, I've seen it several times as well. But we've had a lot of fun as we've celebrated 30 years of this experience. When you stop and think about it, the first, and I think the video that you'll see at lunch, talks about the first Summer Institute, which was about 1988, I think, in San Diego, at the University of San Diego, and they had 271, as I recall the number, attendees. Well, you know, we have many times that just in this room today. So it's really remarkable what has been accomplished and what one lady who was just not take no for an answer, and those of you that know her understand what I'm saying, has allowed this to occur. But it's taken a lot of educators and a lot of great kids a lot of years to help us get where we are. So thank you for being here and participating, and it's certainly my hope that you have a great week. Now, let me give you an apology. I'm sorry, and you may really feel that way as the rest of the afternoon goes on. I'm sorry that I'm here doing this, not because I mind, because I kind of enjoy it, but our plan this summer, and what we've done in every one of the institutes until now, is to have one of Mary Catherine's original students, or someone in the first couple of years, come back and tell their story, and talk about their experience in AVID, what it meant to them, and how their lives have been impacted over the last 25 or 30 years. And that was the plan for here in Chicago as well. We had a wonderful young lady who, if you saw the 60 Minutes video this morning in Newcomers, you actually saw in that video. She was one of the ones that they interviewed when they did that show nearly a decade ago now. And she had planned to be our speaker. She wrote a speech. I've actually got the speech. I guess I could read her speech, but it wouldn't be the same, and you'll see why. But Josie, her name is Josie Pelayo Bittler. She's a teacher, professor at a community college up in Michigan, had an accident occur in her family where her mother-in-law was pretty badly hurt. Her father-in-law has a very serious mental illness, and she just couldn't leave. She just could not leave. And so about 2 weeks ago or so, and I'm not sure exactly when, we learned that she would not be able to come. Well, about 5 or 6, 7 days ago, I was down in Orlando, and I got an email from Stephen Barat, who is our one of our communications people and kind of oversees this process. In fact, a while ago, Stephen said something very wise. He said, who's that guy singing those Michael, Bublé songs? You know, that dates him a little bit, I guess, or dates us. It was Frank Sinatra, by the way. I think there's a lot of Stephen Barats out here. Anyway, Stephen said, well, we've tried everything we can. We've been turned down by dozens of people, and you're all we have left. So would you be willing to pinch hit and deliver a few remarks at the opening? Because typically what I do is close this and then close the luncheon, which I love doing. I follow the kids, or I follow a really excellent keynoter, get to say some nice words and say, go get them. But today I need to, I guess, do something a little more substantive. But they, you know, this is how serious they were. They called the White House. I mean, obviously the president's from Chicago. They thought surely he could hop on Air Force One and come over and deliver a keynote. You know, what's the big deal? And they kind of chuckled at the White House and said, you know, we really need more than a week's notice. And the same for Secretary Duncan. I mean, he's another Chicago lad. You know, grew up here, spent many years here, led CPS for a number of years, and they kind of just rolled their eyes and said the same thing. So then they had a brainstorm. They had a guy that they know is now out of work here in Illinois, and thought that maybe they know he likes to talk. And so they asked if your former governor was available, and they found out that he had other trials and tribulations going on, and wouldn't be able to be here. In fact, I think then I saw in the paper this morning the closing arguments were today, so I thought, well, maybe he'd be free this afternoon. But then I don't know how it went, so maybe he wouldn't be. So I guess we couldn't. Anyway, so after going through all of that, they decided that, well, maybe I would just have to do it. So I'm glad to be here. And I first thought, well, you know, I could do what I do a lot of, and that's kind of pump AVID and try to promote AVID and show you a big PowerPoint and talk about the growth and all of our plans. And then I started yawning and thought you would be yawning. And so I thought, no, let's don't do that. One of the things that is so inspirational about these gatherings is, yes, there's a lot of hard work, and the strands are rigorous, and they better be rigorous. I mean, that's what we brag about. And the site team work is important. I mean, you're really planning for what's ahead of you. But the keynote, hopefully, but most specifically, the messages you hear from the young people at the luncheons are so valuable because it's their stories, and they can explain to you why this has been important to them. It really gets you in the gut. You know, it's not just about pedagogy and content. It's about how lives are changed by the work you do. And so I thought, well, is there a way that I can talk about those stories to make it pertinent to you as the week begins? And so we'll see. So I'm going to try. And Stephen said, all right, Jim, you have 15 minutes. And I said, well, gosh, I got 2 hours of material. So I've cut it down a lot. So if you know, by 3 o'clock, if I'm not quite done, y'all are free to 3:15. You're free to, no, I really won't go that long. Let me tell you a little bit first, a little bit more, and Rosemary gave you a little bit of my history, and I don't want to make this about me so much, but I think knowing a little bit about my journey and how I got here would maybe be of some assistance as we talk about these young people, because each of you has your own story, and that story is really, really important to you and to the ones around you, and in particular to the kids you're responsible for as you start doing this work. And I know many of you are new, because that's the way these work every time. They wouldn't have that many people in newcomers if that wasn't true. So I'm not just aiming this at you, but I think it will be particularly pertinent to you, I hope. I was born, no, I'm not going to start that far back, but I grew up in West Texas. You probably can't tell that. You thought I was from New Jersey. Ellen Nickerson and I were separated at birth. No, I grew up in West Texas. We moved out there when I was just a kid and started in first grade and graduated from high school. I graduated from the high school that's featured in Friday Night Lights, for whatever that's worth, which is not much. And that's a whole different story that I could tell at a different time. But we came back there after my wife is also a graduate of the same high school 2 or 3 years later. I was only 10 when I graduated in 1968. I was kind of a prodigy. She was a little bit older, not much. But anyway, we got married, came back, had our 3 sons, and they grew up there, and they ended up graduating from the same high school. And the only point I make of that is that how change happens so dramatically in our communities now. I graduated from high school in 1968. My youngest son graduated from the same high school in 1999, and it was a very different place. And not always for the better either, I would say. Now, I'm happy to say now that school has AVID, and I think it would say it's a much better school, in part because of AVID, but in part for some other reasons. But when I graduated in 1968, there were like 700 in my class, and I think there were maybe a half a dozen kids that didn't look like me. Handsome, that's what I was saying. And in 1999, when Cliff graduated, it was a very different place. Probably 50% at least of the kids were non-white. Mostly Hispanic, but it had probably a 10 to 20% African-American population as well. And I would suggest that Cliff was much better off than I was in that sense, because he was much better prepared for the world that he was going to live in than I was. I was kind of in a bubble and didn't really find that out until many years later. I grew up with nothing but white friends, for example. He grew up, and his brothers grew up, with a multitude of diverse friends. In fact, we used to call my oldest son's gang the United Nations. His best friend was African American. His next best friend, if you can have such a thing, was Hispanic. And then there was another guy that hung out with him that was Chinese. And he's much better prepared for the reality of our world than I was. So anyway, I go into law school, I come back to the community, and we raise our kids. In 1984, I got elected to the school board. I wanted to do something that made a difference. Practicing law was fun, but it wasn't all that fulfilling. There was an opening, so I ran, I got elected. I served for 11 years. I think I was a good board member. I don't know that I was a great one by any stretch of the imagination. I would probably be better now in a lot of ways, except that I would also be a real pain in the rear for the superintendent, because I know a lot more now than I did then. But in any event, it was an important time for me because it started me on a road that has ultimately led to where I stand today. And I feel very, very, very fortunate to be involved with AVID today. I later got involved at the state level with the State School Board Association. Met some people there that later became very important in my life. Got appointed first to the head of the Educator Certification Board and then the state agency, the TEA, as Commissioner of Education. And then after doing some other things, I went to work for the first time as a school employee. I quit practicing law in 1999 when I got appointed commissioner. I'm kind of jumping through this real quickly because I want to get to important stuff, not all this background, but I need to set a little stage for you. And in 1999, I became commissioner. In 2002, I went on to other things. And in 2004, I became superintendent in Richardson, Texas. Richardson is a school district of about 35,000 kids. It sits right on top of Dallas Independent School District. It's very diverse, 67% non-white, 55% free or reduced lunch. And it thought it was 1975. It was not a bad district. The high-achieving kids were getting one heck of an education, and a lot of the other kids were just not hardly noticed. And they were hungry. They were really hungry for change. And I was in part a catalyst for that, but mostly what I did is I freed up people who really wanted to do the right thing. And now 6 years later, and I was only there 2, so I'm not taking a lot of credit for this. 6 years later, it's clearly one of the best school districts in Texas. And one of the primary reasons for that is because of AVID. AVID came in 2003, and if you went into an AP class in the 4 high schools, they didn't look like the schools. They didn't look at all like the schools. Now they do. If you looked at the valedictorians and salutatorians, they didn't look like the schools either. Now they do. So I'm really proud of these folks because of the work they've done to make this diversity and the rigor match so that kids have an opportunity who never had an opportunity before to be really successful students. Those of you that were at Summer Institute last year that remember the slideshow we showed with the kids holding the cardboard confessions, in fact that's what it's called, cardboard confessions, that's one of the Richardson schools. Those young people are now all in college, all 40 some odd of them, and they did really well last year, and they're excited about going to their sophomore years. But if you remember, because I do, because I've gotten to know those kids and love them, there's not one white face in the group. And that's important, not because there's not white kids, because it means that the district has finally recognized that these other kids can meet the expectations too, and that they can do the work. The only reason I was able to be successful in Richardson is because I had some transformation to do myself. I told you a little bit about how the high school was, that I went to. And I don't think I was fortunate. I had 2 college-educated parents, which was unusual for people born in the 20s. But I certainly wasn't, and I was certainly raised to be open-minded, but I wasn't around people that required me to be open-minded. So it's easy to say you have a great attitude about diversity when you're not around diversity. So it took a while for me to realize the difference. But a couple of things happened. A couple of things happened in all those years I've just described that I think helped me get to a point that I could be in a position to be part of something like AVID and hopefully successfully part of it. While I was a school board member, I had a conversation with my favorite teacher. All of you in this room, I'm sure, have a favorite teacher. This was sometime in probably the early 90s. She was my Mary Catherine. This was a woman named Carol Dial, and Carol was my English teacher. It was before AP. It was before almost everything in 1967. But Carol taught advanced or honors English, I think it was called then. And she was a great teacher, and I loved her. My wife had her 3 years later. By that time, she was teaching senior English, and she felt the same way about her. And as the years went by and I got on the school board, her husband was an administrator at the central office, we got to be really close friends. And I asked her one time, I said, Carol, what is it that you did, or what is it about you that made you such a great teacher? Well, you can imagine her first reaction was, oh, I'm not a great teacher. You know, she was very humble on top of everything else. But I finally kind of pinned her down. And she said, you know, Jim, I just have a very simple attitude. If they're not learning, I'm not teaching. If they're not learning, I'm not teaching. And I just thought that was really wise and very different approach. It's not about me, it's about the students. And if I'm not able to convey this information and get them to where they love to learn English literature, for example, then I have failed in my job as a teacher. That was one. The second one happened several years later. It was after I was off the board, and it wasn't near as happy a story. My wife is a speech pathologist. She went back after raising the boys and got her master's, and at the time was working in a couple of elementary schools in Odessa, where we lived. This is probably 97 or so. And she came home one day in tears. And one of the schools, curiously, is Cameron Elementary. And James Johnston, a young man sitting in front of me, is a fifth grade teacher at Cameron and came up to me a minute ago, and he's here working in the elementary strand. It's a much better school now, James, I would tell you, than it was this story I'm about to tell. She came home one day in tears and said, the saddest thing happened today. I walked in the office, probably for an art or something, and this school was not particularly well run. And it was a school in an impacted area of town. Nearly all the kids were poor. Most of them didn't speak English, they're second language learners. The principal was not terribly engaged. He told the staff that he thought his major responsibility was checking the Weather Channel every day to determine whether the kids played inside or outside. So that gives you a little bit of idea of how well run the school was. But Karen is in there, and there's two little 6-year-old kindergarten boys. And one of them, she overhears one of them say to the other one, did you see the sirens and the flashing lights at my house last night? The police came and got my daddy. And the other little boy said, no kidding. And I don't know if he said no kidding, but he said, they came to my house and got my daddy too. And I said, Karen, that is sad. That's terrible. And she said, no, that's not the sad part. The sad part was the matter-of-fact way that these 6-year-old boys shared that story with each other. It was just part of their lives, something that they were used to. And I remember thinking then, how in the world do we break this cycle so that those two little boys, 6 years old, don't become their daddies? And I'll be honest with you, I had no answer. I just had this seed that was kind of planted in my mind then about what is it we can do, if anything. How do we prevent these two little boys from becoming their fathers? And how can we break this cycle of dysfunction that seems to envelop so many of our communities? Well, time passes, and AVID comes along into my life. And for the first time, I'm thinking, there is a way. There is a way to break that dysfunction. There is a way to break that cycle of poverty and abuse and all the things that you will hear sometimes AVID kids talk about. And that's why I think this work is so incredibly important. Josie Pelayo Bittler was one of Mary Catherine's first students, and she was going to speak to you today. And I have a portion of her speech, just a couple of paragraphs that I'm going to read. I'm not going to read the whole thing, and it's really good, because I'm very hopeful that next year she can tell it to you herself. We're going to try every way we can to get her back. But her story is really powerful, and this is nearly 30 years ago. Who I was. I was a different person 28 years ago, much thinner. I miss my size 8, but this is about that. But that is about all I miss. I hope she doesn't mind I read that part. You see, I'm a first-generation immigrant. I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants who had only finished the 6th grade. My father is frustrated. He drinks too much and takes it out on his family. And if those of you that watched the 60 Minutes video, that's the same father that tore a paper up into hundreds of pieces. My mother is just confused. She loves living in the U.S., but can't figure out how to function in her new home. The education, there's that part, that's the 2 little boys, again. Then the part that is really sad is the educational system made it clear I was disposable. I was in, quote, special classes, close quote, where the only thing special was that students spent hours with worksheets meant to keep us busy. I was with teachers who refused to provide me with a book because I didn't speak English, even though I was asking for the book in English. I was with teachers who encouraged me not to worry about school because, and I know you've all heard this, Hispanic girls are married and pregnant by 18. Still, I had a dream of attending college. And she goes on to talk about the struggles she had, both with her peer group, the kids that made fun of her, the kids that kicked her books out of her hand, kids that said she was acting white. And then she talked about the white kids, the kids she was now in class with, who laughed at her and said, "You'll be the first one to fail, the first one to drop out." She heard that all the way through graduate school. I think she quit hearing it by the time she got her PhD. She now teaches at a community college, has 2 wonderful twin kids, daughters. I don't know if they're daughters or sons, or one of each, for that matter. But she's a wonderful example of someone who overcame. But this just tells you how hard it is to break that cycle. She gives Mary Catherine an enormous amount of credit for that, as she should. And then there's another young man who's touched my life. And some of you in the room know Jonathan Grant Brown. Jonathan is a young African-American young man. I guess he's now, 22, 23. We first met 4 years ago in Austin at the Summer Institute. It was right before I started as executive director. I had already been named, and it was the first institute I came to after that. And Jonathan was one of the student speakers. He just graduated from Shoemaker High School in Killeen. Killeen is a pretty good-sized community right outside the gates of Fort Hood, the big Army base in Central Texas. And he told his story of when he was 5 years old, as I recall. Is that right, Rosemary? When he was 5 years old, he and his little brother were playing in a park across in Killeen, and his mom said, "I'm going to go over across the street to the grocery store. I'll be right back. Stay here with your little brother." His little brother's named Tiger. Says, "You and Tiger stay here, and I'll be back." Well, you probably can guess. She never came back. 2 days later, they finally came, and authorities came and got them to leave because Jonathan didn't want to leave because Mom's coming back. She said she was. Why would you lie to me? Well, 14 foster families later, Jonathan finally gets a chance in AVID. In the meantime, he's been a bully. He's a big kid. He caused all kinds of problems. He skirted the law. He will admit doing illegal things, but never got really caught. He and his brother were separated. His brother went into a whole different foster family regime. But a teacher sat him down when he was about a freshman in high school and said, "Jonathan, I know you're smart. I know you have capabilities. What is it you want to do in your future?" And he said, "Miss, I don't have a future. You see, because when I turned 18, they cut me loose. I can no longer be in a foster family, and I'm on my own, and I have nothing. I have no future." And instead of doing what so many teachers had done to him in the past, by patting him on the back and say, "It's going to be okay, you just need to, we're going to figure something out," and yada, yada, yada. This teacher said, "Jonathan, we all have problems. Yours are tough. But the only way you're going to overcome them is through your own initiative, and I'm here to help you." And it kind of got his attention. It wasn't easy. He started in AVID. 4 years later, he graduates from high school, and he's, as some would say now, an AVID rock star. He goes off to college. The teacher, as it turns out, went to Lubbock with her soon-to-be husband, and so he follows her up there because he felt like he still needed the support. Was in a community college up there, and I had him come down. Like I said, I grew up in Odessa, and I was speaking at a P16 council meeting in Odessa, in Midland, Odessa, to a whole bunch of educators, and I thought, wouldn't this be a good thing to have Jonathan come down and give the student perspective? So I did, and he came down, and fortunately, I went first because he is really good. And Jonathan, when the crowd kind of quit crying, he brought his little dog with him too. I thought, now that's a neat trick. I hadn't thought about bringing a dog. When afterwards, a gentleman came up to him, and I didn't know this until later, and said, Jonathan, have you ever thought about going to the university here in Odessa? There's a University of Texas branch there. And he said, no, I didn't even know they had a university in Odessa. He said, well, I'll tell you what, if you will move down here, stay out of trouble, make your grades, help with AVID in the local school district, I will pay for everything. And Jonathan thought for about a second and said, let me get my stuff. In May of this year, Jonathan graduated with honors, and he's now in graduate school. He's working they have a pilot AVID program at that university. We're now in the post-secondary arena. He's also kind of a master tutor. He'll be training tutors in the local school districts. His goal, he tells me, although I think it'll end up being much higher, is he wants my job. I promise you'd rather have, no, I'm not going there. He's really good. But he's a remarkable young man, and we're all very, very proud of him. That's the good news. The bad news is his little brother, Tiger, who was also abandoned, went into the same foster care system and didn't have the same good fortune. He ended up in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, in the mental health system. He got lost in the system, spent 4 years in a facility where I don't think anybody knew where he was, and he's pretty screwed up. And I would suggest to you that there's not any difference between those two little boys and what their potential was. And so what our obligation is and what our duty is and what I think our greatest challenge is to make sure that, yes, we recognize the Jonathans and the Josie, and we help them break that cycle, but we somehow avoid losing the Tigers too. And that's hard. There are thousands and thousands of young people wandering up and down your halls. It is really difficult. But somehow, some way, we can't miss these kids. There's an old story, and you've probably heard this, and you may think it's kind of a bad cliche, but I think it's really true about the two guys walking along a beach, and the beach is filled with starfish, and one guy keeps bending down, picking up, and throwing one back out in the surf. Bending down, picking down, throwing it back out in the surf, and the other guy says, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm just throwing the starfish. They're going to die here in the sun. He said, well, look, there's thousands of them. You can't make any difference. And he picks up one and throws it in the surf and says, I made a difference for that one. Well, that's Jonathan, and that's Josie. I suspect that Tiger may never make it. I doubt very seriously that those two little boys in Odessa made it. I don't know. You can always hope, but I have a real suspicion that they got lost as well. Somehow, some way, we have to figure out a way to keep that from happening. And there's nothing I've ever been involved in, or nothing that I'm prouder of than this program and its ability to help you become great and passionate at what you do, and to become really good at recognizing the Tigers and the little boys and the Josies and the Jonathans and all the others that are out there really wanting an opportunity to excel and be successful. Jonathan's going to break that cycle. Josie's already broken it. We don't have to worry about those two families. That's a pretty cool way to be remembered if you stop and think about it. So I hope that you have a great week. I hope you take advantage of the opportunity. We have the best professional developers in the country here today, this week, leading these strands. So be there, participate, learn, do the same in your side teams, and then take that information home with you so that you can truly begin to make a difference, so that your story becomes one of helping these young people reach their potential. Man, what a great legacy to leave. Your school, your community, your family. Thank you, and have a great week.